And so be warned, we are now recording. And welcome to our hearing on the memorial that's coming before our Senate Assembly. Just a little bit of background on this memorial. It comes to us from the environmental stewardship team based out of Faith Lutheran in Leavenworth. And this memorial was revised by the Reference and Council Committee ahead of coming as all memorials and resolutions are. And it was split into two parts. One part of it is going towards is coming before the Senate Council, so it won't come before Senate Assembly for action, because that's asking a specific department of churchwide that's of our churchwide organization that is overseen by the churchwide council to take action. And so the correct pathway for that is our Senate Council to the churchwide council, and then the churchwide council will direct ELCA advocacy to take action. And so that's a piece of it, and that will be also spoken to in this hearing. But just know that part won't come before the floor. And then the part that will come before the floor is a memorial encouraging our congregations and ministries and members throughout our Northwest Intermountain territory to take some action as well. We have, and so there'll be a presentation by Jim Martin Schramm and Barbara Rossing for the first 20 minutes or so of this hearing. And then there'll be an opportunity for further conversation and questions being asked. And for those questions, if you have a question, go ahead and use the raise hand feature, which is on the reactions. If you move your cursor over your screen, on the bottom right side of the screen, a little reaction with a smiley face and a plus emoji will show up. If you tap on that, then you can raise your hand, and that'll let us know that you have a question. You can see I have my hand raised, or you can ask it through the chat, and I'll be monitoring that. And so you can raise your hand at any point, but just know that that will begin to call on those folks after the presentation. Any questions on about the format at this point? All right. Thankful for y'all that you all are here, and let's start our time together by gathering ourselves and centering ourselves with a word of prayer. So let us pray. Loving God, we give you thanks for this day, and we thank you for every day that you give us. You have created us to be co-creators and along with you, and caretakers of all that you have made. We ask that you give us courage and wisdom as we carry out the caring for this creation that you have gifted us with. We give you thanks for Barbara and for Jim, and also for the environmental stewardship team out of Faith in Leavenworth, and for their leadership and for the knowledge and their expertise that they are to share with us. We ask that you bless us in this hearing, and that you walk with us as we continue to care for creation in the best way possible. We place this day and each day to come into your hands, trusting that you are a good and loving God. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Barbara and to Jim.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Rossing, a professor of New Testament at the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago. So you might be wondering why I'm here. I fell in love with a guy from Wenatchee, and we now live in Leavenworth. So I commute and teach remotely in Chicago from Leavenworth. I also was formerly pastor at Holden Village back in the 1980s, so I really fell in love with Eastern Washington with these mountains. And I will say I've seen how the weather and climate have changed just since the 1980s, and that's part of my conviction that we need to take steps to prevent further climate change, to prevent mega fire events like we saw in Malden last year, or in Pateros a couple of years ago, and in Oregon. It's really alarming. So I was a geology major in college. I'll talk a little bit about that too, but I really believe that to solve the climate problem, it's not too late, but we need to send market signals now that reflect the real cost of fossil fuel burning, which includes the cost of health things like asthma and wildfire smoke and drought and much more. So the key that we're going to talk about today is how to put a price on carbon pollution so that it's not free anymore to just burn carbon, but we want to speed the transition to clean energy by reflecting the true costs and then give all the money back to people. So that's the Energy Innovation and Dividend Act that we're advocating for and talking about in this hearing. Since the main speaker is going to be James Martin Schramm, a professor at Luther College, but since I'm a Bible scholar, I just wanted to start with a little bit of Bible. And Pastor Phil, thanks so much for the prayer. I think the Bible can help us, and I'm going to try to do screen sharing here to show you a few slides. Oh, now I lost my slideshow. See, this happens to me. What? Oh, really sorry. Well, maybe I'll just talk about the Bible if I can't find the right screen. Here it is. Okay, I have too many windows open. Take that out of the recording. Okay, so this is where I teach the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago, and we have the Zygon Center for Religion and Science, which is wonderful. We really believe in science and the importance of pastors knowing science. And then I'm also on the board of Lutherans Restoring Creation. So this is a grassroots organization nationally that seeks to work on care for creation. So this resolution that we're looking at today in memorial come out of Lutherans Restoring Creation and also the Lutheran Action Team of Citizens Climate Lobby. Oh, sorry, not good at it. So all our religious traditions view the urgency of climate change as something that churches should really be talking about. This is Pope Francis. We could also look at the Greek Orthodox Patriarch Bartholomew, and certainly our ELCA and Lutheran World Federation leaders. So just a little bit about the Bible in Genesis 1. One of the things I've been working on is the creation story, where, as Pastor Phil said in his prayer, we are co-creators with God. And the creation story in Genesis is just amazing. After each day of creation, God sees how beautiful planet Earth is, the whole creation. So it's typically been translated as God saw that it was good, but now newer translations are, instead of that, doing how. God saw how good it was. And that's the Common English Bible, the one I held up earlier. This is a translation I'm using now. Or you could even translate tov, that word that's translated as good, you could translate as beautiful. So God looks at each day of creation of this world and sees how beautiful it is. So when God makes the firmament, for example, which we would now probably translate as atmosphere, and separates the waters above from underneath. Obviously, this isn't a scientific account of creation. It's more like liturgical poetry. As Ellen Davis says, we certainly believe, I believe the universe is 13 billion years old. The earth is 4.5 billion years old. So the poet in Genesis isn't trying to do science, but this whole idea of God creating the atmosphere, and that's the thin blue line in this picture, and calling it good. This is the most fragile part of the earth. This is what we have to care for most urgently, because even though the earth is huge and robust, it's this thin line. It's what astronauts call the thin line. Here's an astronaut, Sally Ride, wrote about it in a children's book she wrote. When I was an astronaut, I spent hours gazing down at the earth below. I could see a thin, fuzzy blue line outlining the planet. And she says, at first I didn't know what it was. And then I realized it's Earth's atmosphere. It looked so thin. And I realized this is our planet's spacesuit. So that's what we have to take care of. Jim will do the science a little more, but this is a striking slide to me that comes from our most prominent climate scientist, James Hansen. Planet Earth and planet Venus actually have the same amount of carbon, yet Venus is 450 degrees centigrade hot and the Earth is not. Why is that? Because for the Earth, most of our carbon is safely sequestered underground in rock layers, the sedimentary rock layers that we're now digging up and burning during all those ages of the Earth. So when I was a geology student, I learned, all the eras and epochs of geologic time, the Pennsylvanian, the Permian, the Mississippi, and we know that that's when most of the carbon got laid down under the Earth. It's safely sequestered underground. But if we dig it up and burn it, then the danger is our planet will become hotter and hotter, like Venus. So we need to listen to the scientists. Here's one that I just listened to a webinar on Wednesday, Professor Catherine Hayhoe at Texas Tech. She's great, and an evangelical Christian. We need to listen to our neighbors around the world. This is one of my favorite Tanzanian bishops. I know it's not our companion synod, but this is Bishop Frederick Shu, who's known as the tree planting bishop. Our sisters and brothers in Tanzania are raising the alarm, friends, that they can't adapt to the terrible climate change that's happening as droughts increase, as floods increase. Everything is intensified, and they don't have the same money or resources to be able to do adaptation. So we really need to mitigate this problem for the sake of our neighbors around the world. Here's one of my favorite authors, Wangari Maathai, who is a Nobel Prize winner for planting so many trees. So just to listen to the voices of sisters and brothers around the world is really, really important, and do something about it. So I'll just conclude with this slide. This is from Holden Village, the tree of life and the river of life. I think the Bible has so much to teach us about how God's home is with us on earth. God loves our world and will never leave us behind. And now God is urgently calling us to care for this creation. So I want to now introduce Professor James Martin Schramm to talk a little bit specifically about how we as Lutherans can advocate for political legislation and why it's really important as part of our vocation as Christians. He's, well, I'll let him introduce himself. Jim, if you want to take over here.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. It's really an honor and a privilege to be with you all today. I'm a professor of religion here at Luther College in Decorah, Iowa, which is a long way away, but my in-laws, John and Mary Schramm, live in Leavenworth, and I'm a graduate of Pacific Lutheran University, and my two brothers-in-law live in Chelan, and I taught at Holden Village for many years, so your synod is near and dear to my heart, and Barb is a very good friend, and more than happy to accept her invitation to join you today. I'm ordained in the ELCA. I'm on the clergy roster of the Northeastern Iowa Synod and have a call to be a teaching theologian at Luther College. A few years ago, or a couple of years ago, one of the members of our church, First Lutheran here in Decorah, asked me, Jim, what do you know about this organization called Citizens Climate Lobby? And I knew a little bit about it. And so I thought, well, before I would commend it to her, I'd start digging in and learning more about it. And I was pretty impressed with what I saw. And anyway, Leslie Sand took the bull by the horns, and she formed a chapter here for the Northeastern Iowa Synod. And the next thing I know, we're doing a webinar with her here at Luther in March this year, and she's formed this Lutheran Action Team. So Citizens Climate Lobby up to this point has been primarily focused on one approach to carbon pricing called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll wrap up my comments by 12:45. I might have to speak a little fast to get through my slides. So let me see if I can share my slide deck with you.
Jim, take longer if I took too long, because it's only 10.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Oh, I don't want to shortchange the conversation. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm also the director of Luther's Center for Sustainable Communities, which is a wonderful initiative we have here to promote sustainability on campus and to be a catalyst for change in our region here in Northeast Iowa. I don't know how many of you have perhaps been to Luther. if you haven't and have the inclination, please drop by the next time you're in the upper Midwest. We'd love to welcome you. It's a pretty neat place, and we're trying to model what we talk about. So we have a 1.6 megawatt wind turbine, and further to the left on that picture is another 1.7 megawatts of solar PV, all of which is helping to power our campus. Oh, sorry. I guess I can't use the arrow keys for some reason. As Barb indicated, right, all of us in one way or another have already been experiencing the impacts of climate change. I know for folks, you folks, the annual fear of wildfires and your just your experience of their devastation is all too present. For us, we had two 500-year flood events in 2008 and 2016. We have some folks that work at a meat processing plant about 20 miles south of Decorah. Many of them are from Central America. Some of them are here because they simply can't work outside anymore in the growing season because it is so hot and the atmosphere is so humid that their bodies can't evacuate the heat. And so they've come north because it's unlivable for them in Salvador and Honduras. So lots of ways that climate change is affecting us. One of our colleagues in the Citizens Climate Lobby is a meteorologist in Madison, Wisconsin, I think for the ABC channel there. And he presented the next set of slides, which is about this little community in Alaska, Shishmaref. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly or not, but there's a little Lutheran congregation up there, and it's the northernmost ULCA ministry in the US. And they're kind of located on this little spit of land stuck out in the sea there. And as you know, right, big precipitation events are a big problem. Wildfires are a big problem, but if you live close to a coast, it's rising sea levels. And so gradually they are losing ground, and they need to move because they will ultimately, the sea is going to reclaim them. And here you can see one of their buildings that has fallen away. Unfortunately, the cost is $180 million to move them. I have no idea. I think what I learned last time was that it's unlikely that cost is going to be available or going to be paid. So they're going to have to figure out how to relocate on their own. But the reality is climate change is posing serious impacts, not only for future generations, but for current generations. All of us are seeing these impacts and are feeling in our pocketbooks the financial impact of these gigantic natural disasters. The memorial and the resolution that your Synod is looking at articulates the sort of basis for our concern for care for creation and the first social statement in 1993, and then sufficient sustainable livelihood, expressing a concern about special concern for the poor and a sustainable livelihood for all. We have a very strong platform of social statements in the ELCA that are directly relevant to issues related to climate change. And I'm proud of our church that we have these excellent teaching documents. Here's a wonderful quote from Presiding Bishop Eaton on Earth Day in 2018, but it's just as relevant today as it was then. We seek justice for all of creation in concert with God's creative and renewing power. We do so understanding that we have the ability and responsibility to act together for the common good, and especially for those who are most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So, there are lots of ways to address climate change. This is one tool in the toolkit. It's called the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. It was recently reintroduced in the 117th Congress of the United States by Ted Deutsch, who's a Democratic congressman from Florida. but it has been introduced in the previous two Congresses of the United States. So it's not a new idea. It's been well vetted and well considered. Justin Tigerman, I think, is a Luther College graduate. Let's see here. Okay, this bar is in my way. Oh, for heaven's sake. Okay, so how does this thing work? Well, and I think most of you are familiar perhaps with the concept of carbon pricing. You know, when I drive down the road, Barb and I have the same kind of car. It's a plug-in, what is it, Honda Clarity plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. But it does have a gas engine. And so when I have to fill it up with gas, you know, here in Decorah, it's about $2.80 a gallon right now. I'm sure it's a little higher out where you are. You know, I have to pay that. But the reality is that you know, $2.80 a gallon doesn't really reflect all the social and ecological costs associated with putting carbon into the atmosphere. And so the idea with carbon pricing is to better reflect in the prices of fossil fuels the true social and ecological costs of burning those fossil fuels in our engines. So in this case, like most approaches to carbon pricing, it involves putting a fee on these fossil fuels at their source. So when the coal comes out of the mine, when the natural gas comes out of the wellhead, when the barrels of oil get delivered to a port or also come out of a well, then there's a particular fee that's levied on that fossil fuel based on the carbon content of the fuel. Those folks are gonna, you know, they're gonna pay that fee to the government, but they're gonna pass that cost on to us as consumers. There's no free lunch here. But then the money that the government collects, this is what's unique about the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. The money gets returned to households as a monthly dividend to help households cope with the rising cost of these fossil fuels. I think you'll hear later this year that quite apart from this this particular bill, that the Biden administration is going to introduce a carbon border adjustment charge, because you know, if other countries don't have carbon pricing and we do, it gives their products a leg up. So key features: it starts at $15 a ton, goes up $10 a year. It doesn't sound like much, but actually it amounts to quite a bit. One of the provisions in the bill is if US emissions are not declining at the rate that the National Academy of Sciences and the EPA determine are necessary to hit carbon or hit 90% reduction by 2050, then the cost per year goes up by $15 a year, not just $10 a year. It's also adjusted annually for inflation. As I said, every household gets paid a monthly dividend. Each adult gets a full share. We just got our dividend or our stimulus check this week. Wow, you know, between the $1,400 each, it was $2,800 check. I couldn't even deposit it, you know, online because it was too big a check. Well, anyway, in this case, each adult would get a check on a monthly basis, and every minor or person under 19 years of age would get a half share on a monthly basis. So that's how that dividend gets returned to every household. In the previous iteration of this bill, there was a suspension of EPA regulation on greenhouse gases, and that's been taken away. That was a big obstacle. Some folks in the environmental community were very opposed to that. And it's a credit to Deutsch that he dropped that from this bill. Another part of it, though, that is controversial for some folks is that, you know, if you're a farmer and you had to pay for, you know, the carbon fee on your diesel, well, you're going to get that refunded to you. And the military gets all of its carbon fee refunded to it. And then if you're one of these companies that's spinning up a carbon capture and sequestration, you get that refunded to you as well. So, you know, there are trade-offs with this bill. It's not perfect from anybody's point of view, but welcome to politics, right? It's the art of compromise. And these are the key features of the EICDA, Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. So, my concern is, well, what will this do to consumer prices? And so this is from, if you look down here in the lower corner, Resources for the Future, which is a major league green think tank. They have this terrific carbon pricing calculator. You just Google that, Resources for the Future carbon pricing calculator, and it'll take you about 5 minutes to figure it out. But once you do, you'll discover it's pretty interesting. Anyway, according to them, they say that starting at $15 a ton, adding a $10 charge per year over until 2030. So starting in 2022 through 2030, it would only increase air travel by 4.19%, electricity by 24.35. Now that's probably looking at the national carbon mix. It'll be higher for us here. It'll be lower for you out there because you got all of that hydropower at incredibly low prices. I'd kill to have your prices. The folks up in New England.
Move out here, Jim.
What was that?
Just move out here. You can have our cheap.
Hey, who knows? Well, anyway, and then you can see what happens to motor fuels, natural gas. So, think about those. That's the cumulative increase by 2030. Well, that's 8 years. Divide every one of those numbers by 3 or by 8, and for some of that, it's close to just 3% a year. That's doable. I've been living with cost increases my whole life, and I can deal with 3% a year. So it's not dramatic. It's not unreasonable or incredibly dramatic increases. But what we're concerned about as Christians is the impact of any public policy that on the poor. And the next 2 slides try to indicate how American households will fare. So here, this bar here is all households in the United States, and this is the poorest 20%. So 96% of the poorest families or households in the United States are going to be benefited by this policy. Here's the next 20%, 85% are going to be benefited. Here's the next, quintile, the 40 to 60%. So you can see how that works out and then how it balances here. Not so good if you're, doing pretty good and you're in the top 20%. Well, guess what? You're wealthier and maybe you should be paying more. From my perspective, that's what equity is about. So anyway, this is from a study. I think my next slide has that link here down there, CCL 2020 Household Impact Study. This was a study commissioned by Citizens Climate Lobby by an independent third party. So then this is breaking that same number down differently. For people who are living below the poverty line, 90% are going to come out better. For low income, minority households, family of 4, older adults, single parent households. In general, these folks are coming out much better than under other forms of carbon pricing, where there is no dividend provided to anybody. The tax gets levied, the fuels go up, but you don't necessarily get any money. And so that's one reason why I have been interested in this particular approach to carbon pricing. So there are many benefits. Okay, it's already 10:45. If this thing gets approved, we will reduce our emissions 30% in the next 5 years. So by 2027, reduce our emissions, starting in 2022, reduce emissions 30%. And then by 2050, this is where we are right now. If nothing really changes, our emissions are forecast to remain pretty flat. But under the Energy and Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, they would decline about 90% by 2050, which is pretty darn impressive. And you can see, the international community has been saying, better to come in with an increase in atmospheric temperature by, no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. I think personally that's going to be pretty hard to do. But under this, we should be towards the lower end of 2 degrees Celsius. And so, that's much better than where we're going to be if we continue up here. We're going to look at a warming in this century of around 3.3 degrees Celsius. That's that's a rate of warming unprecedented in the history of our species. We're on the road to doom if we continue business as usual. I think I better move quickly here, Barb. The reality is, you know, our economy has been and continues to be fueled by fossil fuels. And every time you burn that fossil fuel, it's incredible the energy density in every one of those fuels. But we are releasing not only carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but also sulfur dioxide, nitrous oxide, and then particulate matter from the incomplete combustion of fossil fuel. I'm sure some of you on the call today suffer from asthma or perhaps from another respiratory illness. Those illnesses rack up a serious amount of cost for the US healthcare sector every year, and those costs get paid either by us as insurance premium payers or by us taxpayers who pay to Medicare and into pay for Medicaid. So affordable clean energy helps to reduce those medical expenses and will create lots of jobs. Here in Iowa, we've seen the whole wind turbine maintenance field explode. I know further out in the West where you folks are, the solar industry, maybe not so much in Washington, but in Colorado and California and Nevada, it's, you know, the solar industry has really created a lot of jobs. You know, the other side of that $800 some million of cost is the lives that are lost from air pollution. And then on the right here, you can see the projection of how many lives would be saved by driving down our consumption of fossil fuel. This is the current estimate of what a family of four would get paid in an annual dividend in the 10th year of this program. So it starts small, and so the dividends are small at the outset. But, you know, 10 years from now, that's how much your household would be receiving to help compensate for the rise in fossil fuels. The bill has received a lot of support, including by Jim Hansen, who Barb referred to earlier, and Catherine Hayhoe, who Barb referred to as well. Some of these other folks I'm sure are familiar to you as well. I have other slides that, you know, with quotes from them, but I decided to leave them out. Barb and I are both members of the Citizens Climate Lobby Lutheran Action Team. I think there, I don't know, somewhere between 25 and 30 members now nationally. If you have any interest, you know, if you can, or just, you know, jot down Citizens Climate Lobby, and then once you get to their website, find their search bar and type in Lutheran Action Team, it'll take you there and you can noodle around and investigate further. I want to close just with explaining why, you know, I'm concerned about this topic. This is my wife on the left, Karen, our younger son, Joshua, our older son, Joel, and at that time, his pregnant wife, Lauren. This is our first granddaughter, Anna. Now we have another granddaughter, Caroline, who Karen and I are going to have a chance to see for the first time in 8 months next weekend. You know, we love them and we care a great deal about what their lives are going to be like. You know, they're going to live the majority of their lives in the second half of the 21st century. And if present trends continue, there are going to be a lot of difficulties associated with their lives. So I want to do everything I can to try to reduce that impact as much as I can. So thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to join you today. I'm happy to try to answer as many questions as I can. I don't think I'm an expert on the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, but I probably know more than most people do. And so I'm happy to do the best I can in that regard. And what I can't answer, I'm happy to try to dig up and send it on to you folks. So thanks very much. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much. We have a hand raised by Betty Kraft. Go ahead, Betty.
Okay, hi. And I'm in Spokane. One of the things that I get concerned about is we don't look at end-to-end cost very often. So, you know, electric cars are great. If you're just looking at the electric car, there's no emission. If you're getting your electricity from a coal-fired plant, then, you know, some of the benefits are diminished. And even with wind, I think the blades are made of titanium, which means mining and those costs of, pulling that stuff out of the ground. And how much titanium is there in the world? I guess, as I'm looking, and I agree we need to do this. That's not the problem. But I just wish that some of the climate folks would do an end-to-end projection or an end-to-end cost, because, when you're mining, there are environmental costs to that. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Betty. One of the courses I teach here is a senior seminar for our environmental studies program, and we're in it right now. It's called the U.S. Energy Transition and Energy Democracy. And one of the books we read is this one, Our Renewable Future by Heinberg and Fridley. And these two are real Debbie Downers when it comes to, grappling with this energy transition. And they point out exactly what you just said, which is there are environmental consequences with every form of energy production. Barb and I, as I said, both drive this plug-in hybrid electric Honda Clarity. Well, they have lithium-ion batteries in them. And lithium is a scarce, rare mineral. It requires mining to get it out of the ground. To my knowledge, wind turbine blades, Luther has a wind turbine. I'm looking at it right now. To my knowledge, it doesn't have any titanium in it, but it does have a lot of fiberglass, and it certainly does have other precious metals that are in it. So it's a very valid point. There's a lot of embedded energy in every piece of hardware that we buy, including the computers that we're watching this on via Zoom. So they're all, I guess the thing I want to say there is to totally agree with you, and to lift up this point, right? That there are environmental impacts related to everything that we do. And the key, I would say, is to try to minimize them. I don't think there's a perfect option here. But one thing we know for sure is, and I think you acknowledge that, is we just can't keep putting all of this carbon back up into the atmosphere, because it simply can't absorb. Well, it can absorb it, but we can't survive the impacts from it.
Thanks, Betty. If I can just add, this is Barbara. Jim is the editor and author of many books. This is one, Eco-Reformation, that we've got chapters in. I guess the only point I would disagree with you on is I think the environmental community does take it seriously. So this can sometimes become a trope of saying, well, let's not do anything because there are costs. So I think what we're saying about this Energy Innovation and Dividend Act is don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. It's true, there are costs, absolutely, but we have to do something for carbon pricing now. And we see this as the best option. But of course, conservation is really, really important. Everything else, as Jim said, this is just one tool in the toolkit, but it's a really important one to do now.
And I would agree with you that this is probably the thing that we need to do right now. But again, I think that in presenting this kind of information, it's useful to talk about, these are the trade-offs. And even if we use lithium batteries, the fact, the environmental costs of using a lithium battery is still less than the cost of putting X amount of carbon in the air. That's kind of what I would like to hear from environmentalists and conservationists.
If I can just respond to that quickly, the memorial, let's see, Phil, you may have to correct me, but the thing that doesn't go to the Synod Council that you will vote on, I guess, is that the resolution that you vote on?
That's the memorial that comes before Senate Assembly.
All right. Anyway, that particular piece is just saying, as a synod, we kind of rededicate ourselves to engaging in adult education or education in general about care for creation, and including, making use of this incredible resource from the ELCA, which I haven't talked about yet, which is this document on carbon pricing principles, or what do they call it? Carbon pricing basics, maybe, Barb. And it's really excellent. And I tried to, I took all of the principles out and put them in both the memorial and the resolution. But I would very much hope that Betty, your congregation and others would by using that document kind of engage in conversations precisely about the kind of stuff that you've just raised. I see David, is it Haven, has asked a question about how does hydrogen power figure into the future? And I'll offer some remarks in this regard. Again, it's a topic that's been part of our course. And I will say that I think any form of carbon pricing will help in terms of the advancement of hydrogen as an alternative fuel in the future. The problem with hydrogen is well, two or three problems. You can't just go out there and grab it. It's not like oil you can drill out of the ground. It's connected to water, or it's connected to natural gas, and you have to separate it from the water or separate it from the natural gas. And the way we've been doing that up to this point is pretty energy intensive. We basically take a fossil fuel, we heat the gas to natural gas to a high temperature, and then through what's called thermal stripping, we separate the hydrogen out. We can do the same thing with electricity through a process called electrolysis, but again, it requires a large amount of electricity. And so Betty's point was, okay, good for you. You got your electric car, but if you're driving it on coal-fired electricity, what are you really doing for the planet? And so that is a problem. And so people talk about gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, but there's a lot of interest in hydrogen, especially because now, one of the issues with wind power is that it tends to be more productive in the evening, and that's when we're all in bed and we're not turning on every electrical device in the house. And so there's a lot of supply and not a lot of demand. Well, if you could use that significant supply to convert or to power electrolysis to produce green hydrogen, then you have the hydrogen available to run through a fuel cell or to burn in an internal combustion engine when solar drops off or when wind drops away. And so there's a lot of effort and energy going into this idea at the moment, especially in Europe, where they're also thinking about blending hydrogen with natural gas to supplement natural gas supplies for heating. We lived in the UK for a year, and natural gas has become very important as the UK has abandoned coal. So yeah, there's a huge future for hydrogen, and I would say any form of carbon pricing is only going to help hydrogen become competitive economically.
Can I just jump in before we go to the next question? Thank you so much. I just want to say a word about the power of synod resolutions. And if you want to learn more about all these energy topics, Jim's got great webinars that you can watch too. But the carbon pricing basics was developed by the ELCA in response to a 2019 synod resolution from the South Central Wisconsin Synod. Our resolutions and memorials make a difference. Similarly, the 2016 churchwide assembly decision to shift away from fossil fuel investments in the social purpose funds and in the ELCA Fund A happened as a result of a number of synods passing a resolution asking for that, and then it went to the churchwide assembly. So I just want to say we can really make a difference with this resolution and this memorial. The educational interesting stuff is in the whereases. I mean, Jim did a brilliant job in response to Pastor Seth Rummage saying we need to split it into two, which is fine. But it's the whole thing I think is interesting educationally, but the power of adopting this at your synod assembly will be to send a really important request to ELCA churchwide that makes a difference in the way our church can position itself ecologically right now. I mean, other churches in some ways are farther ahead with some of this, but we're way out there ahead too. And I'll just say another word for Lutherans Restoring Creation, as well as the Lutheran Action Team. We're doing a worship service again that you can use anytime in April. It could be April 25th or some other time, or May, with Bishop Eaton preaching about Earth Day and the importance of care for creation. So this resolution can make a difference, and this memorial can make a difference.
Yeah. Thanks, Barbara. Greg, you have your hand up, so go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. And I applaud the idea of having education being the focus. And like Betty, I like to see the end-to-end costs, but then, and part of this education needs to be educating ourselves against the social media tropes that get passed around about such things as titanium wind farm blades when they're really carbon fiber. And I saw something the other day about, oh, these wind towers just get abandoned. They'll have to be buried because there's nothing recoverable. Well, they're steel. Steel is like 100% recyclable. The windings in the generators are copper or aluminum. So, and like you say, there is embedded cost in making them. But same thing with a new natural gas plant or a new coal-fired plant. You have to mine the steel to build the coal-fired plant. You have to build the rails for the train to get the coal to the coal-fired plant. You know, so there's embedded costs in all of these things, and to push that all on green energy and saying, well, there's these increased costs, so it doesn't make sense to do it. You're right. We need to educate ourselves and make sure there's a good balance, but there is embedded costs in all the any energy extraction. There's no free ride. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. Any other questions or comments? You can use the raise hand or also speak up in the chat as well.
Well, I'll just say again, I mean, until we get another question, we can do endless filler. Jim and I are both preachers here. So, but I understand. I think I'm going to speak for 3 minutes at the Senate Assembly, but if some of the rest of you, Greg, others can speak in favor of this, I think it really helps. And we'll try to get people to listen to the recording. You know, just saying nothing's perfect, but we think this is the best option right now that we've got, and that it can help.
So Phil, I do have a question.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether it's Jim or Barbara that would be the best to answer this. I think I've missed the main point, because it strikes me that simply taxing fossil fuels and giving the money back to individuals provides no incentive for me to reduce my fossil fuel, because the price is only going to be passed on to the consumer. So you're going to pay me to pay the higher price. So I don't see where. It sounds like it's more a way to provide additional resources to poor people versus a way to reduce greenhouse gases. So I'm missing a point here, I think.
Jerry, I'll just say, and then Jim can add, well, no, because hopefully this is reflecting the true price of fossil fuels. And then you'll decide, hey, I could better spend my $2,800. If I get a more fossil fuel efficient car, I get to pocket the money and, I don't know, go on a vacation or something. So you don't have to necessarily, I mean, I think it will modify behavior. I think that's what's been proven over and over, is that price signals, market signals, are one of the most powerful ways that people change their behavior, and we will consume less fossil fuel.
Jerry, if I could share a slide from a lecture I gave yesterday, I think I can demonstrate Barb's point. Is that all right?
Well, my point, it really is, I want the resolution to have as much power behind it to maximize its probability of being approved. And I think there's a key question like that for just very fundamental understanding. How does this drive behavior, as opposed to hope it drives behavior? Whereas other carbon tax initiatives, the tax is actually used for science, R&D, and so forth. So it's a direct link, and people are seeing that higher price. And so there we have the unfairness, inequity in it,
Right.
because everybody's being charged the same for their gallon of gas, and some can afford that easily and others don't. So there's flaws with that strategy as well. But in those cases, that money was a direct application to R&D to improve the situation. Whereas here, I'm not seeing any money going to R&D, but only going to consumers.
This was necessary to make this a bipartisan bill. So you're right, we need other tools. But the Republican criticism was this increases the size of government, but it doesn't if you return all the money. So that's the bipartisan aspect of it that people like George Shultz support. All the Republicans who support it are asking for that portion, so it doesn't increase the size of government as a sneaky. Sorry, go ahead and share the slide, Jim.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right, Barb. That is the reason it is the way it is. It's to get enough political support to get any form of carbon pricing passed. you're right, Jerry, that there's so many things we could do with that revenue, including pumping it into research and development. But over time, let me just quickly try to show you this slide. Let's see if I've got the right one here. Hope it is. Yeah, this was the slide this is the deck I used yesterday. Let's see, share from this slide. So this is looking at vehicle miles traveled and gasoline prices. And so this is the growth of vehicle miles traveled, adjusted for population over, what is that? Gosh, more than 10 years. You can see it keeps going up. And then this
20 years.
Yeah, and then this is the price of gasoline. And you can see, and so this is also a point about the inelasticity of the price of gasoline. Americans were willing to tolerate a higher price and kept driving, but it got to a point where the price of gasoline hit whatever that was, around $3.70 maybe, or $3.50 something. In whatever year that was, 2005, let's call it. And then because it went up that high from $2 or so, vehicle miles traveled started to decline. Now here you have the recession, and so as a result, of course, you're going to have significant decline. But it kept declining for a while, even though gas prices went back up. But then as gas prices declined, you see the consumption go back up. So it's just a general point here to show that at some point, raising the cost of fossil fuels does change behavior. You're right to say, well, what's the point if you're just going to raise the price of fuel and then give people money back? Aren't they going to just keep driving more? But at some point, they will start making a decision about, well, that's money I'm going to get every month. Maybe I'll walk, or maybe I'll ride my bike, or maybe I'll carpool, or maybe I'll trade in my F-150 for a more fuel efficient vehicle, whatever. But at the end, and of course, there we're just talking about households, not businesses and industries. But at some point, it makes more sense to either change the way you use energy, use less of it, whatever. So that's the idea behind carbon pricing in general. That's not unique to this particular bill.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jerry, for the question. And thanks, Barbara and Jim. Seth Rummage, I believe, has a question.
Hello, Professor Martin Schramm. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, Seth.
My question is about, you mentioned that this has come up before 2 Congresses already. And Professor Rossing just talked about this being a bipartisan work. What has been the hang up? Is there anything specific that the reason that this has not passed already?
Well, it's pretty clear, right? I mean, instead of it's the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. It's not called the Carbon Fee and Dividend Act or the Carbon Tax and Dividend Act, but that's what it is, right? It's a fee that we're levying on carbon. And you and I, we all know that tax is a 4-letter word in Washington, and it's a non-starter. That said, all we have to do is look at your neighbors to the north. In Canada, they have basically this Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. That's what they have. It's started at around $15 Canadian dollars a ton. It's supposed to go up to $10 a ton. So Canada has now a nationwide carbon fee and dividend. The European nations have various kinds of carbon fees. There are carbon fees in California and over in what's called the RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in the northeastern states. So there are plenty of nations that have carbon fees. No one has one that will be this aggressive if it were ever implemented. So the reason it doesn't exist right now, Seth, is because it has been very difficult to generate the political will to add yet another fee or tax on the American people, even though, in fact, we are not tax in any way, shape, or form to the extent that lots of other nations tax their citizens. But I understand the political issue around that. And so I want to come back to the way I started this presentation, which is to say the Carbon Fee and Dividend Act or the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act is one tool in a toolkit. There are a lot of things we need to do. And Jerry pointed out earlier that, we need to be pouring more money into research and development. This is what Bill Gates has been hammering on for years, especially around nuclear. He's right. And so we ought to do that. We need to figure that out. And a couple of days ago, the Biden administration says, well, one of the ways we're going to do it is to take away one of the annual subsidies to the oil and gas industry and take that money and pour it into incentivizing renewables and promoting research and development. So there are lots of ways to address this issue. Carbon pricing is one of those ways. But a lot of nations have concluded that it is a strategy to take now. And if you look at the resolution, there's this council of economists that includes Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, who very much agree that carbon taxation is the most cost-efficient way to reduce carbon across an economy.
If I can just add, this is so important because our synod has districts that are Republican, but moderate Republican. If you look at the endorsers of this, it includes many, many Republicans, including Republican Treasury secretaries. The problem is they often endorse it after they're out of office. And part of that is they get primary challenges from the far right. Representative Don Inglis is an example of that, who said he started supporting this, but he got a primary challenger from the right, but his kids helped him see the importance of this. So the more we can do, especially in Washington, we have this primary system now that the top two voters get on the ballot. So it's not as dangerous for a Republican to support this because they're not as likely to have a viable far right challenger. I mean, I think we can really help our moderate representatives have the courage to do this because it's a pretty tame bill. And we've got to do something about carbon pricing and then use other things as well. But I think our synod can play a very important role in helping encourage our lawmakers to have the courage to do this.
Can I ask a follow-up as well? When it comes to the resolution that is going to the churchwide unit for ELCA advocacy, what is the vision for how they will approach this? What are you hoping ELCA advocacy will talk to our representative senators about to make this sound better?
What the memorial says is that the church council is to, recommend, I forget what the verb is, but basically encourage ELCA advocacy to advocate for the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act and similar legislation. So it's not tying ELCA advocacy's hands, and it's certainly not telling them that's the only thing they can advocate for with regard to climate change, but it is saying, we think this is something that deserves our support as a church, and where and when there is an opportunity to advocate for it, please do so.
And I'll just say, I am so impressed with our ELCA advocacy people in Washington, D.C. It's Ruth Ivory Moore is the environmental person. The boss is Amy Ruman, who's an ELCA pastor. Wonderful, wonderful. If it's not too late to sign up for ecumenical advocacy days, April 18th to 21, if you're interested in that. And this is a great time to do it this year because you can do it remotely. Other years you go to Washington, D.C., which is really exciting. But our advocacy staff, you see how they work. They set up appointments with legislators. I'm in the 8th district here in Leavenworth, other districts, and you actually meet with your congressperson and you say, my church is advocating for this bill. So it gives real power to our advocacy staff to be able to have something like this to take in with meeting with congresspeople and senators to say the ELCA church cares about climate change and this is what we want you to vote for.
All right. Well, thank you. So just being mindful of time, we're just past the 11:15 mark is what we have committed to this. As far as the Senate Zoom station, we don't have anything coming up until for another almost 3 hours. And so if Jim and Barbara are willing to stick on, if there are further questions, we can certainly keep this going. But I also want to be wanting to be good stewards of our time as well. And so
And will you make the recording available then so we can send it out to congregations and others who are interested in learning more about it?
yes. And so what I will do is I will upload this recording to our Senate YouTube channel, and then we can distribute that as well. And especially if this resolution or this memorial passes on Senate Assembly, but even if it, no matter what happens at Assembly, the Northwestern Intermountain Synod is committed to lifting up creation care and being good stewards of what we have. And so this hopefully won't be the last that you hear about this and other similar creation care stuff. And so, yeah.
So Phil, this is Jerry. I have another question, and it relates specifically to the resolution. I don't quite understand. The resolution, in my opinion, says nothing. It simply says rededicate, which invokes none of the passion that I've heard here today.
It's because we had to split it in half. We were required to split it in half.
Please let me finish my question. And I don't understand how we capture, what are we asking the Senate Assembly to approve that would embrace that sort of passion and motivate them to do something when this has been so neutered? I don't understand.
Yeah, as Barb was saying, Jerry, the original resolution, contained both the business about encouraging ELC advocacy to work on this bill. And then because that has to go to a unit of the church, that has to be a memorial. And so you're right, that some of the teeth out of this kind of got lost when that division had to happen. And I don't want to tell you what to do. I mean, if you want to make a motion to amend that resolution in some way that better fulfills the sort of passion and information that you gleaned from this session, by all means do so. So yeah, I don't know what to say other than that. It's to rededicate, and then I should have the document in front of me.
I have it. So
Okay.
if I can just ask, so Jerry, sorry, I was talking over you there. Phil, do people not have copies of both the resolution and the memorial? Because actually the meat of it ended up going into the resolution that goes to the Synod Council and then to the ELCA Church Council. But you're right, that was the most important meat got taken out, and we had to put it in a resolution because of the requirements. But if people could at least have copies of both of them, you'll see, because we want people in the Synod to advocate for it also. It's not just, so if that could at least be an amendment that asks that both pieces be included in the Synod Assembly materials, that would be very helpful. Because we had a much more comprehensive resolution, but then we had to water it way down, or we had to split it into a resolution and a memorial. And the only thing that Synod Assembly participants vote on is the memorial, which lost the crucial piece, which had to go to the resolution.
Yeah, and I think well, the good news is I think we can distribute that the resolution that's going ahead before Synod Council. We can make that available not just to the voting members, but I mean we can make that available more broadly across our Synod, saying this is something that, and Jerry, you are on Synod Council, so that's on our Synod Council agenda for the 17th.
Good.
Yeah.
And so we have an opportunity to lift up, that the Synod Council is both considering this, and then if the Synod Council passes that, to say this is what was passed at Synod Council, and to make that piece available. But I think I think what you're pressing up against as well, Jerry, and this is me kind of speaking as an opinion, and this is my own opinion as Phil Meisner, not speaking on behalf of the Senate or as even on behalf of the ELCA, but I think this is you're bumping up to an awkward piece of how the ELCA is structured, kind of polity-wise, is that any memorial or any resolution that comes before Senate Assembly tends to be have a pretty sterile feel to it, especially when you're just reading it on paper. And so, I mean, that's just the way that it is, and that it's really through the hearings, and it's also through the conversation that happens on the assembly floor, where that passion and where the reason why this is important gets communicated. It doesn't get communicated through the actual memorial or resolution itself, but it's in the conversations around that where, you know, this is why it's important. And I think that's true for almost all legislation, I think, right? If you're just going to go to Washington State website and read bills that are going before the legislature, it's going to be pretty dry. And pretty thick stuff to get through, but it's really in the conversation on the floor and the conversation informing that policy that you really hear why it's important, and that's where, you know, and so it's just kind of the nature of the thing itself.
Will the resolution, if passed by council, at any point be recombined with the memorial, or they continue to be two separate documents on two separate paths, or what is
yeah, it probably won't. I think they're going to be two things on parallel paths, and so one going for the one going, you know, because one is asking for action on it from a specific unit of the church-wide organization, and that has its one path, and then the other one is going to have the path that goes before assembly, and then that one is a directive of congregations and ministries and members within our Senate. So that's so it's kind of two parallel tracks that are not mutually exclusive, but are kind of side by side. At least that's how it makes sense in my head. So.
Yeah, it sounds like that is the new policy. It's really too bad. In the olden days, I mean, I was ordained like 40 million years ago. We could keep things together so you could sort of overhear the things in a single resolution that were addressed to the church-wide and to, you know, as opposed to the things that were addressed to education. But yeah, to have split it, it would be very important for people to be able to see both. Thanks so much, Jerry. I'm really glad to know you're on Senate Council. I hope we can get the two paths to be able to overhear each other.
well, I just want to be sure that we're not in our making transparency a priority. We have somehow divided this in a way that a select group of individuals called the council get to weigh in on a particular part of this without this. And in the worser case, in my situation, we're asking the Senate Assembly to approve this without this other part that only at this point a select group of people have understood and seen. And it doesn't sound transparent. And I wonder if by dividing these, we really haven't compromised the ability of each to be successful.
Mm.
I need to let council play out and figure all of that out. But just if I'm just a regular Senate Assembly delegate and you ask me to prove this, it's kind of what for? I mean, it doesn't ask me to or tell me to do anything specific. And so if for instance, the Senate Council approves the resolution part and it becomes part of what is offered to the entire Senate Assembly to say, oh, the council has approved this action part that was necessarily divided because of our polity, but now becomes part of what we offer to this entire Senate Assembly, that's totally different, and in my mind, a little bit more complete. But
Yeah.
but I haven't been part of the deliberations on this, and so I'm being a little unfair, not having had the opportunity to understand why it was divided and so forth. I'm just trying to think from the Assembly's perspective. We're asking them to do something, and there's a part missing, and so it's not making sense to me.
So can I just propose, that's really helpful. If the Senate Council approves it April 17th, that's a week before the Assembly, then could that fact be added as a new whereas? That, I'm just thinking out loud here, but an additional whereas would say, and whereas the Northwest Intermountain Synod Council has approved this, and that, then it goes to the Assembly. So at least there would be that information. But I agree, it'd be great if it wasn't compromised.
Yeah, I think so. Just kind of from a practical standpoint, I think if we could, I would maybe recommend amending the resolution coming before Senate Council to add that whereas. And I'm seeing Seth Rummage, who's part of the Reference and Council committees, nodding in agreement that would be a valid amendment. And then it would officially commit the Senate Council to bring it before Senate Assembly and to lift up this action. So I know Bill has had his hand up for a while, so we'll go to that, and then Seth has his hand up as well. And thanks for taking extra time. I'm good till about noon Pacific, so that's 1 Mountain and 2 o'clock for you, Jim. And then gotta go at that point. So
yeah, it's actually what I'd asked in the chat, the timeline for the council vote versus the assembly. So I was going to suggest whereas to link the two together. So it sounds like what you suggested actually is very logical in my mind.
Yep. Yeah, and that could work, and it's good to have some Senate Council folks on this, so we can be committed to, we can make that happen, hopefully, at the meeting coming up ahead of Assembly.
So I also was going to suggest an amendment from the floor, so I'm glad that came up. I think that's probably the best way to go about it. Also on this memorial that is going before the Synod, at the end of it, there are some resource documents. The way that it's shown on the memorial is hyperlinks to websites, but I don't know if resolutions end up on the Northwest Intermountain Synod website or not, but we could definitely also, through an amendment, we could again link these two by saying this is the resolution that went to Synod Council, that went to Churchwide Council, that directed ELC advocacy. So you can you can have the memorial that is approved, or assuming that it's approved, but the memorial that goes before the Synod Assembly, you could have that the resolution linked as a resource document to say this is how this pathway went, and this is what we're suggesting to the Synod. And Jerry, I don't want to take up a huge amount of time here, but it was my suggestion to break up the two, and I can talk with you a little more about why that happened if you're interested. Just like Professor Rossing was saying, there's been some changes at the church-wide level about how things need to be sent in. So I can give some more information to you if you're curious about that.
All right. Any other questions? Otherwise, super grateful for all this.
Thank you.
All right. Well, it's good to be with you all this morning and into the afternoon for some of you. And again, this is the same Zoom link will be what's being used for everything Northwest Intermountain Synod Assembly related. So all of the orientations coming up as well as Assembly itself on the 24th. So if you got here, you can get to other places as well. We'll see you soon.